Personally, I've preached on that passage from the Sermon on the Mount multiple times. It's quite long, so there are plenty of places you can dive into and get more out of as you read that passage. But Luke's account is much shorter, and Luke seems to be telling a sort of more direct account than Matthew may have in his version. One of the things that we'll take just a moment to talk about when it comes to the Gospels is that the Gospel writers had different approaches to recording the Gospels because they had different audiences in mind. Matthew starts out the beginning of his Gospel, notably, with a genealogy of Jesus. Now, who cares about genealogies? Now, that's not me being flip. I'm actually asking that as a question. The people who care about genealogies, especially in Jesus' time and the time after his ministry, were the Jewish people. Jesus was the Messiah. He was descended from the rightful line. He had the pedigree to be who he claimed to be. Now, Luke, on the other hand, is a Gentile, and maybe a Gentile convert to Judaism. He may have, in fact, been a proselyte who then became a Christian after that. But Lucas, as is his name, is a very good Greek name. And so he had a sort of a different approach. The dedication to his gospel, the very first section there, the first 4 verses, Luke is dedicating this account of the gospel to a man named Theophilus. And he has also got a good Greek name, possibly another Gentile person, or at least a person from a Greek-speaking background. At any rate, because they had different audiences, they had different priorities of what to write down. The things that interested Theophilus and Luke's, for him writing his account, were different from what Matthew had in mind. So we're looking really at 2 different versions of the same lesson here. So as we're reading this chapter, let's get a little bit of a context for what is going on, starting in verse 12. It was at this time he went off into the mount to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer to God. When the day came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also named as apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, Andrew his brother, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon who is called the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. So we get the selection of the 12 apostles here. But you'll notice that he calls his disciples to him, and then he names 12 apostles out of those disciples. Sometimes I think, especially when we're speaking casually about the Bible account, we may use disciple and apostle interchangeably. Disciple means student, means one of his followers, and maybe more accurately, a dedicated follower who spends a lot of time listening to him and learning from him. And the apostles specifically were these 12 guys who he picked and said, all right, your job is to go out. And that indeed is what apostle means, is one who is sent out. So we've got this selection of the 12 apostles, but we've got disciples around in the crowd as well, an additional group of people. Verse 17, Jesus came down with them and stood in a level place. And there was a large crowd of his disciples, and a great throng of people from Judea and Jerusalem, and the coastal region of Tyre and Sidon, who had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. And those who were troubled with unclean spirits were being cured. All the people were trying to touch him, for power was coming from him and healing them all. So Jesus has appointed the 12 apostles out of his disciples, and he's come down with his disciples to this group of people who are all trying to reach him and to access his power, to be healed by him, and to have their ailments lifted. So with this setting, he turns to his disciples and begins to teach them. Verse 20. Turning his gaze towards his disciples, he began to say, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you, and ostracize you, and insult you, and scorn your name as evil for the sake of the Son of Man. Be glad in that day, and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven. In the same way, their fathers used to treat the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you are receiving the comfort in full. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for their fathers used to treat the false prophets in the same way. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Whoever hits you on the cheek, offer him the other one also. Whoever takes away your coat, do not withhold your shirt from him either. Give everyone who asks of you, and whoever takes away what is yours, do not demand it back. Treat others the same way you want them to treat you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend from those whom you accept to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners in order to receive back the same amount. But love your enemies, and do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. So let's pause there for a moment before we continue. Now, Jesus, once again, as we've been talking about, is really talking to two groups of people. His dedicated followers, his disciples, the people who have made it a point to go after him and to learn what he has to teach. And then there's the crowd who needs his help. They're coming to see him because I'm sick, I have an evil spirit, I have a problem, and I know this guy does miracles and he can fix it. And when Jesus is speaking to these people, he's speaking in the presence of those who are hurting and who are coming to him for help. But he's speaking to, specifically, giving this message to his disciples. So he is giving them what is somewhat of a hard lesson, an unpalatable lesson. This is not something that's easy for us to swallow even now. But to paraphrase what Jesus teaches them, is there is nothing to be gained by ordinary goodness. Christians are called to an extraordinary goodness. Jesus asked his disciples at that time to participate in a kind of extraordinary goodness. That when they were talking about, when Jesus was talking about giving with no hope of return, he wasn't merely talking about being generous to people who are nice to you, was he? He specifically says, if someone strikes you on the cheek and takes your coat, give him your shirt too. He's not talking about your friends. In fact, he explicitly says, if you're just nice to people who are nice to you, what makes you any different from anyone else? Everyone would do that just the same. You need to be somebody different. Love your enemies, do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, it says in verse 35. There is nothing particularly special about being good to people who are good to you, Jesus says. If you want to be one of his followers, you in fact have to be good to people who are actively doing you harm. And that is not a lesson that many of us are willing to accept, even people who are following Jesus, even people who are his disciples and are sitting at his feet. In just a little while, just a few chapters, a lot of these people are crowded around Jesus, looking for him, looking for his wisdom and his teaching, will be nowhere to be found. In fact, those 12 guys that he picked out to be his special apostles will themselves scatter for fear for their lives, as Jesus himself is being taken to his execution. There is nothing special, there is nothing good that we can get from doing things that are ordinary and common to even people who do evil. We need to have a higher standard of behavior. And that starts not just with what we are doing to others. I'm not talking about mere charity here, but Jesus is asking for something else. It requires an attitude change and not just a change in the action. The actions without the attitude, in fact, are empty. He said in verse 35, "Love your enemies, do good, and lend expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you'll be sons of the Most High. For he himself is kind and not to the ungrateful and evil men. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Pardon, and you will be pardoned. Give, and it will be given to you. They will pour into your lap a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. For by your standard of measure, it will be measured in return." So, there might be a little bit of a disconnect here between him insisting that people give and insisting that they be merciful. When Jesus is talking about giving, and he's talking about someone taking your coat, those things are not so distant from each other. The Roman custom of the time was that if a Roman citizen wanted something from a non-citizen, he could demand it because his citizenship enabled him to claim it over someone who was a non-citizen. So if I, as a Roman soldier, for example, I've put in my dues, I've earned my citizenship through my years of dedication to the army, go up to a non-citizen like one of these common Jews and say, "I'm cold, give me your coat." I have a legal right to seize it from him. Jesus says, if somebody uses their legal rights to come up and seize your coat from you, don't complain at him, offer him your shirt. Jesus, what are you asking me to do? You want me to be abused by my oppressors? You want the people who have conquered my country, overrun the world with their evil, idolatrous, hateful empire, and run us into oblivion and disgrace? You want me to give him my shirt in addition to my coat? You want me to be naked in front of this heathen and show him kindness in that way? What are you asking me to do, Jesus? How could you possibly expect that of him? So when he says, "Don't judge and you won't be judged," he's saying, you have rights? Well, waive them. He says, "Don't condemn and you will not be condemned." You want to exercise your ability to legally take advantage of someone? Forgo that. Pardon and you will be pardoned. You have the opportunity to have the judge say, "Okay, declaration on behalf of the plaintiff, there's your just reward. Take a pass." Don't exercise what you have over people as a way to gain for yourself. Instead, show mercy. When he says, verse 35, "Love your enemies and lend without expectation of return," he's saying, not only are you not going to exercise your rights and get everything that you're rightfully owed, give them a little bit extra and don't expect them to return it to you. And that way is the way that we will be godly. Verse 39, Jesus continues, "A blind man cannot guide a blind man, can he? Will they not both fall into a pit? A pupil is not above his teacher, but everyone after he has been fully trained will be like his teacher. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Brother, let me take out that speck that's in your eye,' when you yourself do not see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take out the speck that is in your brother's eye. For there is no good tree which produces bad fruit, nor, on the other hand, a bad tree which produces good fruit. For each tree tree is known by its own fruit. Men do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they pick grapes from a briar bush. The good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth what is good, and the evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth what is evil. For the mouth speaks from that which fills the heart. The treasure of the heart, I always think, is such an interesting way of describing this condition that we have. It's really like we have a bank vault, and if somebody comes to make withdrawal, you can only take out whatever's in there. And if you got phony money in there, that's all they're going to get out. But if you're full of the riches of goodness, if you've got God's grace in your heart, then they will indeed get something good when they come to claim it. You know, this whole idea of judgment, as I mentioned a moment ago, gets so tied up with this idea of the condition under which we are ourselves, that sometimes I think it becomes more like, don't tell me I'm doing something wrong, because you're obviously a bad person too. Kind of retribution mindset. But that's exactly the opposite of what Jesus was saying here. The idea for this is not when somebody scolds you to take it personally and say, don't judge me. God says don't be judgmental. But instead, to not pass judgment on people yourself. Whenever we receive correction, I think we should be doing that humbly, and we should be able to take it and to change if indeed we are open to the change. We're not supposed to be looking for the log in the other guy's eye when he comes to tell us we've got a speck in ours. That's not how this works. What we're supposed to be doing is examining ourselves. If you see yourself as the guy with a piece of sawdust in your eye, I'm sorry, you're already hearing the wrong part of this story. Because the part of that parable, the part of that lesson, is about self-examination, not about judging the other guy. So, whenever we get correction, we do need humility. And today that correction is coming from Jesus. He is telling us that if we want to grow, if we want to learn, if we want to indeed become better, we have to follow our teacher. In verse 40 he said, we cannot teach ourselves. We cannot overcome our teacher, but only be as good as him. If we continue on to verse 46, Jesus says this, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? We could probably just have that be the whole lesson. In the context of what we were looking at, it's very striking as well. Because Jesus isn't talking to random people. He's not talking to the people who came up and said, Jesus, my kid is sick, heal him. Or, I can't, I'm blind, let me see. He's talking to the disciples who came and got him down off the mountain. The people who were supposed to be his followers. And they were the ones who come up to him and say, Lord, Lord, or Sir, Sir, Teacher. They're the ones who are putting him in a place of respect. But he says, you guys are not doing what I teach you to do. Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and acts on them, I will show you who he is like. He's like the man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation on the rock. And when a flood occurred, the torrent burst against the house and could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who has heard and not acted accordingly is like a man who built a house upon the ground without any foundation. The torrent burst against it and immediately collapsed, and the ruin of that house is great. You know, I grew up hearing, the wise man built his house upon the rock. And when we were singing that song over and over, and when I have Bible class teachers teach it to me, I always miss that last part. The man who built the house upon the sand is not some stranger who doesn't know Jesus. He's not some heathen out there in the world doing as he pleases. He's not somebody who just doesn't know God. In fact, what did Jesus say explicitly in that passage? He says, the man who has heard and has not acted accordingly. It's the guy who ought to know better and does the bad thing anyway. It's the person who says, Lord, Lord, but doesn't act the way Jesus has taught them to do. And through this whole thing, what has Jesus been teaching them to do? Love their enemies, do good to those who are doing harm to them, and to not judge people for not doing what they believe to be the right thing. Instead of examining themselves, turning to judge others. And really, this is some of the hardest teaching that Jesus ever taught anyone. Because it goes against our nature of defending our own pride and our own feelings. The first instinct anybody has when somebody does something wrong to you is to think about how righteous I am and pity poor me for having to go through this. And there's something very powerful about that feeling that you can't escape it. If something bad happens to you, that's the first thing that every human being thinks. But that's just the basic feeling. That's the first thing we think. And Jesus is asking for us to go a step further. If someone harms you, you don't go with the first thing. Because we're not acting in a natural way. We're acting in a supernatural way. Now, I've said this before from this pulpit, but I'll say it again, especially since there's some folks who haven't heard me speak, at least recently. The word super in the Greek, euper, actually means above. And more than above, it means covering over. So when we say supernatural, we're talking about God's ability to take what already exists and cover it over with godliness, with his power, with grace, and whatever he uses to influence the world. So when we're acting in a supernatural way, when we're acting in a way that is above what is natural for us, it's not that somehow we get magic abilities or something like that. But we act in a way that's more than our base human selves. If I act in the natural way, somebody does wrong to me, I'm going to get back to him. I'm going to punch him in the face. I'm going to say something nasty. I'm going to make sure he gets his. We are acting supernaturally. You know what? He's having a hard time this week. What else have I got? I can help out. Maybe I can show him how people behave when they have God's grace. Maybe I can show him mercy. Maybe I can make sure that he gets what he doesn't deserve by meeting Jesus. Because none of us deserve what God did for us at the cross. But we've all been given the opportunity to contact that. None of us deserve the ability to change our lives and save them and go to heaven. But God gives us access to that through Jesus. So if we're following our teacher's example, as it said in verse 40, we have to be the kind of students who, instead of saying, Lord, Lord, and not doing what Jesus did, instead follow his example. The house on the rock is not just about a wise man who believes in Jesus. It's a man who wisely believed in Jesus and then did what he said. If all you do is believe, you haven't done it. We have to build the house on the rock and not just build the house. You know, this has been said before, and maybe even by me, but the place that the foolish man builds is not just a random piece of ground. It's actually a riverbed. So not only did he not build on the rock, but he was like, I can build a house. This place is flat, and he sat it down right in the middle of the riverbed. It was dry because it was the dry season. And when the rainy season comes along, it knocks the house over and nobody was surprised. Anybody can build the house. Anybody can go through the steps to look like they're doing what Jesus wants them to do, but only the people who have actually understood what he really taught and built their house on the foundation of sacrifice and a non-judgment and of self-reflection that Jesus had, dedication to the scriptures, will actually be able to withstand the flood of torrents. And I hope you're in that condition today. If you're not, there's a flood that can save you from the flood in the form of the baptism. We like to offer that always at the end of our lessons. If you haven't been faithful to God and would like to be restored to his church, we also offer that opportunity. And if we can offer prayers of encouragement or anything else for you, you can take advantage of this opportunity.